Welcome to the Fair Housing Insiders. We are so thankful that you joined us. And please remember to subscribe here on our YouTube channel or follow and like us on your favorite social media outlet, which you can find links to in our show notes for even more fair housing news and insights. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fair Housing Insiders. I'm your host, Jonathan Sarn. With me today is Michael Coughlin. This is episode 87, and today we are focusing on responses to certain questions. While the Fair Housing Act plays a critical role in how you answer questions from applicants and tenants, it can also be used by property management as a way out of either answering a question that is uncomfortable or doing something that they may not be contractually required to do, but may cause them some issues. So very important episode. I'm glad we're covering this today. So what we're going to do, we're going to present some scenarios that have the same basic response. And Michael, we look forward to your reaction to those scenarios and your comments on the question response and something for our audience to give some consideration to on how we answer questions. So looking forward to your comments on that. So let's get into our first scenario.
Do you have a lot of crime in the area?
We aren't allowed to answer questions of that nature due to the Fair Housing Act.
Interesting. So Michael, what do you think?
So this isn't a good answer here. So encouraging or discouraging a resident due to the presence of or absence of crime in an area is just, it's not a good business practice, honestly. It could potentially result in liability for the property management company, the property itself, especially if management is making assurances about the lack of crime or it failed to take reasonable precautions to prevent criminal acts. But the bottom line is this really doesn't have anything to do with the Fair Housing Act. Instead, as a good business practice, we usually tell the best response is to say is to encourage an applicant resident to do their own research on the crime statistics for that specific area.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Appreciate that response. So let's take a look at another one. Let's look at this scenario, Michael. It'll be interesting to hear what your feedback is on this one.
What are schools like in the area?
Due to the Fair Housing Act, I'm not allowed to answer that question.
All right. What are the schools like in the area? How would you respond, Michael?
Probably a really common question. Obviously, when people are moving, especially parents, they are very interested in the school system in the area. Property management professionals, the company in general, it should not be in the habit of offering opinions on whether a school is good or not. First of all, the metrics are difficult to understand. So unless you're an expert, and I doubt if you're working in property management that for some reason you're a school zone expert, that you're probably not going to be that helpful anyway. Instead, we're probably in the same scenario we were in the last case, where we're really not talking about a fair housing question. Instead, we're talking about good business practices. So while it's perfectly fine to mention what schools are in the area, a lot of property management companies will make a part of their flyers or their advertisements will mention which schools are in that county, that area. It's not a good idea to mention how good you think those schools are, and it's certainly not a fair housing issue. Instead, do the same thing. Tell them, please, by all means, do your own research into the schools in our area so you can make up your own mind.
Digible is a marketing and technology company specializing in the multifamily housing industry. We're a motley crew of industry professionals who all share a passion for a common purpose: to transform the apartment marketing industry through creative, data-driven, digital marketing and technology solutions and world-class client support. Contact us today at digible.com.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Michael, for that. So that's scenario number 2. Let's take a look at scenario 3 and get your feedback on that one.
Is there any way you can drop the late fee this one time?
We have to treat everyone the same and cannot make an exception due to the Fair Housing Act.
So this is interesting. Is there any way you can drop the late fee this one time? What is your response to the response?
Well, we were just talking about, questions that you get a lot of, and I'd imagine that there's probably no question that a management company gets more than, can you please drop the late fee this one time? Mm-hmm. This is a little bit of a difficult scenario. We've certainly all been there. I personally have paid my rent late before to a property management company, and I also wanted to get that late fee dropped. So in this case, it is very much coming down to best business practices. I certainly don't think it is appropriate to say we can't do that because of the Fair Housing Act. That's kind of a cop-out. You certainly are allowed to make exceptions when it comes to late fees. That is on the management company to make those exceptions. But instead, it's a business practice about how you do it. So if you are going to make exceptions, that can be a good business practice, but you need to make sure you document it. You have certain criteria as to how you did it. And if anybody were to look at your records as to why you made exceptions of late fees over a long span of time, you could see consistency in why that decision was made and applied. The only time that the Fair Housing Act could get involved here is if you reviewed these exceptions and it turned out that, one race of people were getting them, or disabled people weren't getting exceptions, or, it was favoring one protected class over the other. Other than that, it is purely a business decision, but one you certainly have to be careful about.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Michael, for that explanation. So that brings us to our last scenario. So let's take a look at that and get your comments on it.
Will you negotiate a lower rent on my renewal if I pay the first 6 months up front?
If we lower your rent, we have to do the same for everyone due to the Fair Housing Act.
So lowering my rent, if I pay up front, what are your thoughts, Michael?
All right. So we're going kind of right back to where we were, where this is really a business decision to be made. So negotiation as to payment of rent all by itself is not necessarily an issue for the Fair Housing Act. So again, invoking that purely off the bat is again, it's kind of a cop out. Companies are certainly allowed to negotiate the rent and the method of payment and the timing of payment. They have every right to be able to do that. But again, they need to apply somewhat consistent criteria over a long span of time. So you certainly can negotiate that maybe we will lower this person's rent if they pay the first 6 months up front. That is a business decision. They're allowed to do that. What they're not allowed to do is make those negotiations and exceptions for some people, but not for others, again, due to the protected class. So you need to be able to document the reasons why you made these exceptions or these changes to your normal policies. The only time that there could be some things that could come into play if somebody has has a disability, needs a reasonable accommodation that could technically apply to this area. In that case, they may need to make an exception due to the Fair Housing Act. But in the purpose of just the scenario we're looking at, just saying the Fair Housing Act won't allow me to do that is just not a good practice. And indeed, saying that you won't negotiate any rent is probably not a good business practice in general. Understood.
Yes, some questions that I'm sure our community can resonate with for sure, that they perhaps come across. And in general, it's given us all some pause for thought on how we respond to questions. So excellent scenarios. And Michael, thank you so much for providing some context and into the explanation. We know our community really appreciates it. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in to our show. This has been episode 87. Until next time, take care.
Happy training.
Thank you for joining us, and we can't wait to hear your feedback about today's episode. Do you have a topic that you would like to see discussed in a future episode? Feel free to share that with us. In the show notes, you'll see a link to sign up for our newsletter. This newsletter will keep you up to date with our latest episodes, blogs, and information about our online fair housing courses. Thank you again, and happy training.